Domestic Violence and Justice. Real Court Case Explained. Prologue. Dear listener, I have spent more than 30 years wearing the robe of a federal judge. Thousands of cases passed before me, from petty thefts to crimes that shook the nation. But there are stories that never let you go, even when you take off the black robe for good. They don't just teach you. They change the very essence of who you are. My penultimate case was exactly like that. Until that moment, I believed that justice was nothing more than a cold balance between law and evidence. I held on to the principle, a judge has no right to feel. But that case proved me wrong. It taught me the difference between judging a person and judging their deed. It stripped me of the indifference I once thought was a professional necessity, and for the first time in decades, it forced me to see the defendant not only as a name in a case file, but as a human being with a story, with pain, and with choices. I want to tell you this story. It began in a quiet Georgia town, where life flowed slowly and peacefully, until one evening a gunshot broke the silence. A gunshot that divided a family, a community, and my judicial heart. Chapter 1. The Shot in the Dark. It was autumn. Leaves fell from the trees, covering the narrow streets of the small town of Macon, Georgia. The evening of October 14th, 2014, was no different from hundreds of others, until the 911 dispatcher heard a trembling female voice. "Help! I shot him. He tried to break into my house." When police arrived, they found a scene forever recorded in the case files. A man lay on the living room floor, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Nearby stood a woman in tears, a revolver still in her hands. Her name was Jessica Fletcher, a mother of two, a nurse at the local hospital, with no prior trouble with the law. The man she had shot was James Crawford, her ex-boyfriend, with whom she shared a difficult and, as would later be revealed, dangerous history. The police took the gun but did not handcuff her. In the first hours, everyone assumed it was a straightforward case of self-defense. But as the investigation unfolded, the story became far more complex. That shot in the dark turned out to be just the tip of an iceberg. Beneath it lay a tale of love, fear, dependence, and boundaries measured not in inches by the law, but in hearts by life itself. I did not yet know that this case would become a mirror I had long been afraid to look into. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Had No Choice. Jessica Fletcher appeared in my courtroom months after that night. I saw her not in photographs from a case file, but in person, small, fragile, her hands trembling as she clutched a worn leather purse. Her eyes held not just fear, but exhaustion. Her attorney began right away. "Your Honor, my client acted solely in defense." Mr. Crawford repeatedly stalked her, threatened her, forced his way into her home. The prosecutor countered. "Your Honor, Jessica had options to avoid this conflict. She knew James would come. She was waiting with a gun in her hand. This was not defense. This was retribution." I listened silently. But inside me, something stirred, sympathy. Judges are not supposed to feel sympathy, so I had been taught for years. Yet before me sat not only a defendant, but a woman carrying a story the court had yet to hear. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. The courtroom heard 911 recordings, police reports, neighbors' testimonies. Together, they painted a picture. James Crawford was volatile, aggressive, with a history of alcohol abuse. Police had been called to Jessica's home multiple times. Arguments, threats, violence. Once, he smashed her car window. Another time, he stood outside her door screaming that he would take the kids. But every time, Jessica withdrew her complaints. "Why?" asked the prosecutor. Her voice broke. "Because I believed he would change. Because I was afraid of him. Because I didn't want my kids to grow up without a father, even if he was like that." Her words hung heavy in the air. I noticed the jurors exchange glances. In their eyes, I saw the unspoken question I could not ask aloud. Can fear justify a bullet? Chapter 4. The Night That Changed Everything. The details of that night carried the weight of the entire case. Witnesses heard shouting. A neighbor saw James pounding on the door. Police found the door damaged when they arrived. But the prosecutor pointed out, the gunshot came not at the door, but deeper inside the living room. That meant Jessica had let him in, and then pulled the trigger. She could have fled, the prosecutor said. She could have called the police. She chose another path. Her attorney replied. She chose to survive. Listening to these arguments, I recalled the words of an old law professor. Law is a line. Life is made of shades. In that moment, I knew this case would be unlike any other. Chapter 5. The face of the defendant. For days, I observed Jessica. When the prosecutor spoke, her fists clenched. When her attorney defended her, she stared at the floor. She did not try to excuse herself. She simply awaited judgment. Once, during a recess, I stepped into the hallway and caught her gaze by accident. Only for 2 seconds, but in her eyes, I saw neither a criminal nor a victim. I saw a human being, silently begging for someone to finally understand what she had endured. That evening, I sat in my chambers, staring at the old robe hanging on the hook. I asked myself, can I make a decision that will be just not only in the letter of the law, but in its spirit? I knew then that this case would teach me a lesson I had long avoided. Chapter 6. The children. The turning point came with the testimony of Jessica's children. Courts rarely allow such witnesses, but her attorney insisted, and I weighed the circumstances and agreed. Her eldest daughter was only 12. She spoke with a trembling voice, but her words cut through the silence. He often yelled at Mom. Once, he hit her. I saw it. That night, I woke up to the sound of him banging on the door. I heard Mom crying. Her younger son, just 8, said almost nothing, just one line. I thought he would kill us all. The jurors looked at the children as though seeing, for the first time, the true face of the tragedy. The prosecutor objected, calling their testimony emotional. But deep down, even he seemed to understand. That house had not been safe. Chapter 7. The experts. Experts complicated matters further. Ballistics showed the bullet entered at an angle consistent with James moving toward Jessica, supporting her claim of self-defense. But another expert argued, the distance between them was greater than she had said, meaning she had time to retreat or escape. Every detail became a battlefield between two sides, and with each moment, I felt the fragile line between guilty and not guilty blur even further. Chapter 8. The prosecutor's trap. The climax came when the prosecutor produced old text messages Jessica had sent to a friend. In them, she wrote, "I can't take this anymore. If he comes again, I'll do whatever it takes to stop him." The courtroom froze. For the prosecution, it was gold, evidence of premeditation. Her attorney objected. Those were words of despair, not intent to kill. I looked at Jessica. Her head hung low, her shoulders shaking. I realized those words were the cry of a woman cornered. But was that enough for the law? Chapter 9. The jury deliberation. 10 hours. That's how long the jury spent behind closed doors. I sat in my chambers, listening to the distant hum of the air conditioner, knowing their decision would shape not just her fate, but my own sense of justice. When they returned, the courtroom was packed. Everyone waited. The verdict: we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Not murder, but not full acquittal either. Something in between. A compromise, often mistaken for justice. Chapter 10. The sentence. The final word was mine. Before me sat a woman facing up to 20 years in prison, or perhaps a chance at new life. I looked at her for a long time, and for the first time in my career, I felt I was judging not only her act, but myself. For the years I had hidden behind the cold letter of the law, never allowing my heart to say. I said, Jessica Fletcher is guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but the circumstances left her with no choice. The court sentences her to 5 years of probation and mandatory psychological counseling. The courtroom erupted. Some cried, others protested. But I knew. For the first time, I had reached a decision not only with the law, but with my conscience. Epilogue. The lesson I didn't expect. When I took off my robe for the last time, I thought I was leaving a burden behind. 30 years of trials, sentences, endless cases. But some decisions follow you, even when the courtroom doors close forever. I called Jessica Fletcher's case my penultimate one, because there was one more, a final case, brief, almost procedural, carrying no real weight. But this one, the case of the shot in the dark, was the turning point that forced me to see my entire career differently. 1. Law and life. For decades I clung to the principle, law above all. I believed that if one applied the statute correctly and weighed the evidence properly, truth would reveal itself. I taught my clerks, think of facts, not people. But Jessica's case shattered that illusion. Facts were messy, contradictory. One expert said she could have fled. Another said she acted instantly. The children testified to their fear, yet the texts hinted at intent. I learned, sometimes law without heart is blind. 2. Judging acts, not people. The hardest part was to not see the person before me. She sat at the defense table, shoulders slumped, hands trembling. And I kept asking, am I to judge her as a person or only her act? I learned to separate them. Jessica, as a person, was not evil. She was a mother, a nurse, someone who once loved that man but became trapped in fear. Her act, yes, it took a life, but it was born of despair, not malice. And here lay the greatest truth. A judge must punish acts, not condemn people. 3. Memories of other cases. I began to recall years of verdicts I had delivered. Thieves, fraudsters, violent offenders, all seen only through the lens of statutes. I never asked what had brought them there. Hunger? Addiction? Desperation? I once prided myself on my coldness. Colleagues said, asterisk, you're the perfect judge because you never let emotions interfere. Asterisk, now I saw it differently. Not strength, but weakness. I had hidden behind the law because I feared facing the pain of those I judged. Jessica's case was a mirror that forced me to see. Sometimes indifference is itself a form of injustice. 4. The community's reaction. After the sentence, Macon split in two. Some called me a hero for saving a mother of two. Others called me weak for sparing a killer. I received letters. Some I still keep. One from a woman who had survived domestic violence. Your Honor, for the first time I felt the court could understand. I don't know Jessica, but I know her fear. You gave me hope that I am not alone. Another, from James's brother. You killed him twice. My brother died in that living room, and you killed his memory. To us, he was not a monster, but a son and brother. You turned him into a newspaper headline. Both letters spoke the truth, and I had to live with the fact that truth always has two sides. 5. My career in light of this case. Looking back, I see my life in the robe as a mosaic of hundreds of rulings. But this case was the tile that changed the entire pattern. I realized, a judge's career is not the sum of verdicts, but the sum of lessons. And the greatest lesson was this: justice does not always equal law. Sometimes, justice is the ability to see the person behind the mistake. 6. Personal reckoning. After retirement, I often wonder, what if I had sentenced her differently? What if I had given her 10 years in prison? Would it have changed her children's lives? Would society be safer? I doubt it. Prison does not heal fear. It only changes its address. Now I give lectures to young lawyers. I tell them, you must know the code. But even more, you must know the human soul. When they ask where I learned this, I answer, from one case that taught me to judge acts, not people. 7. Conclusion. I did not write these memories to justify myself, nor to ask for sympathy. I want whoever reads these lines to understand. Even those who sit high on the bench, holding lives in their hands, remain human. We doubt. We err. We learn. Justice is not a formula, nor a chart. It is a path where every step leaves you questioning whether you walk it right. And if, in this one case, I managed to unite the letter of the law with the voice of conscience, then my life in the robe had meaning. For at the end of the day, I no longer see only Jessica Fletcher or James Crawford. I see people broken by fear, and I see myself, a judge, forever changed by their story. That was my last lesson before retirement. And if you have read this far, allow me to say, let this story remind you, judging is easy, understanding is hard. But it is understanding that makes us human.